Hello everyone, my name is MikeTheTech, and today we're going to start a new tutorial. We're going to be using GameMaker Studio 2 to do a platformer. I've gotten a lot of requests to do platformers. I believe it's because of the physics that are enabled and the collision code that can sometimes be a little confusing. So we're going to make a physics-based side-scrolling platformer today. So go ahead and open up GameMaker Studio 2, and we're going to start a new project. And for this one, we're going to use drag and drop, but I am going to be using some GameMaker language so that I could show you the ropes while we learn the process. So let's go ahead and click on drag and drop, and we're going to name this platformer. I'm going to write platformer YouTube so I know which one, and I'm going to hit save. Now, we have our workspace open, and we have GameMaker Studio 2 open. So on the right side, what you're going to find is all of our resources. So all of our assets that are in our game are going to show up in our resources here. So if we want to use anything like a sound or a graphic, we need to place those into our resources folder. On the bottom here, we have our output, and this is where we can see if there are any errors when we run our code and things like that. But for now, we're just going to open up Rooms and click on the first room. And now we have our actual screen for our platformer. So we can zoom out by clicking on this zoom out button or hitting Control minus. Similarly, you can zoom in by hitting Control plus. And you'll see that our width and height are set in the properties. So let's kind of go over this workspace since it changed a little bit, and let's take a look at what's happening here. So obviously this is our visual representation of our room. Any items or objects we place into our room, we'll be able to see where they are and where they're going to be. We can kind of line up our platforms, place our enemies, our obstacles, things like that. On the left side is our layers. And there's a few different types of layers. We have our backgrounds, and you can have multiple background layers. You can have instance layers, which are the instances of your actual objects in your game. And then we have tile layers, and tile layers lets us use tile sheets in order to create the layouts of our levels. For example, if we wanted to use a tile sheet for the platforms or maybe even a map. Once you add those layers, you'll see the layers, the layer properties here. And then the properties of the room itself are what we're going to be editing here. So the height, we're going to be doing a 1080p screen. That's full HP, full HD. So that is 1920 by 1080. And now if we zoom out, we'll see that we have a full HD level. But our width, I actually want to be much wider. So instead of 1920, I'm going to set this to 10,000. And now we have a really long level that we can actually add a bunch of great content in and make it actually interesting for the player to play through. But that's not all we have to do in our room properties. We also need to adjust the camera so that the camera knows it's only going to be showing the HD size, 1920 by 1080, and not the full 10,000 pixel level on one screen. So let's go ahead and go to Viewport and Cameras by clicking on this little triangle on the left side. And we're going to enable viewports and open up our first viewport. And we'll check visible, and you'll see that here's our camera viewport, what the camera is going to see, and we want to make it full HD. So I'm going to make it again 1920 by 1080. And now we have a full HD camera looking at our much wider than full HD level. So perfect. Now we have that there. The next thing we're going to do is go to kenny.nl, a website in Chrome, and we're actually going to download some assets for this platformer and import these starter assets that we're going to be using for our level. So let's go ahead and click on Assets. And let's search for Platformer and see what we find. All right, so we have Platformer Art Deluxe, Platformer Art Redux. Let's see what that is. That looks really cool, but I don't see characters. Does it have characters? Let's find out. Let's hit download. All right, so I've opened it. We have backgrounds, enemies, ground, HUD, items, particles, players. Yes, we have our little alien player. I love him. Okay, so let's go ahead and extract this pack. You might have open this in Windows Explorer, which is fine. If you open it in Windows Explorer, there'll be a button that says uncompress or decompress. You'll be using that to extract files, and you'll be using that to extract the files from the compressed folder. So we're going to use extract 2, and we'll say display files in Explorer, and hit OK. So now we have our platform pack with a PNG folder, and this is where we're going to get all of our graphics for our game. So let's go ahead and go back to GameMaker Studio 2, and we're going to start importing some of these assets. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Sprites, and sprites are what GameMaker Studio 2 calls images. Any images that we use are going to be referred to as sprites, and any objects that we place in our game are referred to as objects. So we're going to right click on sprites and go to create, and then you're going to go to sprite. Now we have this sprite opened up in our Explorer. You see we have a bunch of options to edit our sprite, but we're just going to be importing for this one. So we're going to click on import, and then I'm going to go to my downloads folder and go to Platform Pack Redux. I'm going to go to the PNG folder, and I'm going to go to Players. Now, you can choose whichever player you'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and open up, let's do green. He's an alien. All right. So the ones that we want to import for now is the stand. Later on, we're actually going to be importing or creating animations and everything, but for now we want an idle pose. So let's press OK. Yes. And now we have our player, which we can name SPR underscore player underscore idle. Now, why are we naming it in this way? SPR indicates that it is a sprite, so that when we're writing code, we know that player idle is either the sprite or the object. And then player, obviously, because this is the player character, and idle because that's the animation that he's going to be using. So this is fine for here. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of the sprites. So create sprite. You're going to import. And this time we're going to make an animation. So there's 2 walk images here. We're actually going to highlight both of them and press OK. Yes. And now you'll see we have 2 different frames. So we can change this to, well, if we hit play just to see what it looks like, it runs really quickly. It runs at 30 frames a second. But we can actually change this to something like 4. And that's much more realistic for a walking animation. Maybe we can even make it 6. Yeah, that's chill. All right, so again, we have to name it to keep everything clean. We're going to do SPR underscore player underscore walking. And now we have a standing animation and a walking animation. The next thing we want to do is create an object for our player. So we're going to right click on objects, go to create, and go to object. Now, this time, we're going to be able to choose the sprite from one of the ones we created. So if we click on sprite, choose sprites, and then we have our two sprites here. We have idle and walking. We're going to choose idle. And for the naming of this object, we're going to name it obj_player. We'll actually be changing the animations within the events and the code systems in our game. So we won't need to create a different object for each animation. We'll only need sprites for each animation. So it looks like we're going a little past 10 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it here, and we'll come back and continue this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. Have a great day. Peace.